I just want to fetch a bucket of water for my mother and leave. I don't want any trouble." But Ebere was not interested in peace. She stepped in front of Ujunwa again, blocking her path with a smug on her face. "Trouble? You've already brought enough trouble to this village with your cursed beauty. Did you not kill all your suitors? And now no man dares to come near you. Everyone knows that your beauty is not ordinary. It's evil. We don't want you in this water, spreading your curse to the rest of us." Once upon a time, in a faraway land nestled between lush green hills and a sparkling river, there was a village called Umodin. This village was blessed with vibrant colors and lively sounds, where every dawn brought the sweet songs of birds and the laughter of children playing under the wide blue sky. Among the villagers was a maiden named Ujunwa. She had the kind of beauty that made people stop and stare in awe. Her skin was like polished ebony, her eyes sparkled like the stars on a clear night, and her smile was enough to make the sun blush. The flowers seemed to bloom brighter when she passed by, and even the breeze seemed to carry her scent far and wide, making the young men in the village weak in the knees. But as enchanting as Ujunwa was, her beauty was also a source of envy. The other maidens in the village couldn't help but notice how the young men would gather around her, trying to catch her attention. Some of the maidens, unable to bear the jealousy, began to whisper amongst themselves, spreading rumors that Ujunwa was not entirely human. They claimed she must be a daughter of the water spirits, a mysterious being who had come to their village disguised as a human, for no mortal could possess such outwardly beauty. Despite the swirling rumors and the jealousy that followed her like a shadow, Ujunwa remained unaffected. She never let the whispers steal her joy or dim her radiant smile. She moved through life with grace and kindness, her laughter echoing through the village like a melody that lifted the spirits of all who heard it. She knew that true beauty came from within, and she chose to focus on the things that truly mattered: friendship, family, and the simple pleasures of life. Ujunwa had friends, but deep down she knew that their friendship was shallow, built on pretense and jealousy. They would smile to her face, but she could see the envy lurking in their eyes, feel it in the coldness of their embraces. Yet Ujunwa did not let this bother her. She understood that not everyone would love her for who she truly was, and she was content with that. However, there was one person in the village who was different: Jena, the boy who lived in the compound next to hers. He had been her friend for as long as she could remember. Unlike the others, Jena's friendship was genuine, pure, and filled with warmth. They had grown up together, playing in the dusty streets of the village, climbing trees and chasing each other through the fields. While the other boys admired Ujunwa from afar, Jena saw beyond her beauty. He knew her as the girl who loved to dance in the rain, who could spend hours watching the clouds drift lazily across the sky, and who had a heart as big as the village itself. Jena was an only child, and his parents adored Ujunwa as if she were their own daughter. They often said that she brought lights into their home whenever she visited. The bond between Jena and Ujunwa was unbreakable. forged in the fires of childhood and strengthened by the shared memories of countless adventures together. They were like two halves of a whole, each one understanding each other in the ways that no one else could. As the years passed, the village grew, and the children who once played in the streets became adults with responsibilities and dreams of their own. But through it all, their friendship remained strong. They supported each other through thick and thin, sharing their hopes, fears, and everything in between. Jena's love for Ujunwa was deep. He had loved her for as long as he could remember, ever since they were children playing in the dusty streets of Umodin. As he grew older, his feelings deepened, transforming from the innocent affection of a boy to the all-consuming love of a man. But with his love came a fear that gnawed at him day and night. The fear that Ujunwa might not feel the same way. What if she only saw him as a brother, a lifelong friend? What if confessing his love meant losing her forever? Jena was not a coward, but this was a battle he wasn't sure he could win. The thought of Ujunwa walking out of his life was unbearable, so he made the difficult choice to remain silent. He locked his feelings away in the deepest part of his heart and chose to cherish the bond they already shared. To him, their friendship was like a rare and delicate flower, too precious to risk losing. So he stood by her side, offering her his unwavering support and affection, all the while hiding the true depth of his love. But as time passed, the village began to buzz with excitement. Ujunwa's beauty had captivated not just the young men of Umodin, but also those from neighboring villages. Suitors began to arrive at her father's compound, bringing gifts and asking for her hand in marriage. Each one was more impressive than the last. Wealthy traders, skilled hunters, even warriors with tales of bravery. Ujunwa's parents were overjoyed at the attention their daughter received, and they believed it was only a matter of time before she found a worthy husband. However, what should have been a time of joy soon turned into a nightmare that no one could have ever anticipated. The first suitor, a handsome trader from a nearby village, had charmed Ujunwa with his kind words and promises of a bright future. She agreed to marry him, and a date was set for the wedding. But just days before the ceremony, a tragedy struck. The trader was found lifeless by the river, his body cold and still. The villagers were shocked, but they chalked it up to a tragic accident, a misstep on the slippery rocks. A few months later, another man came forward, a skilled hunter known for his courage and strength. Ujunwa was hesitant, still grieving the loss of her first suitor, but her parents encouraged her to move on. Once again, a wedding date was set, and again disaster followed. The hunter was found dead in the forest, his body untouched, but his eyes wide with terror. This time the villagers began to whisper. Could it be a coincidence, or was there something more sinister at the play? When the third suitor met a similar fate, a warrior who died mysteriously in his sleep, fear gripped the village. The people of Umodin could no longer deny that something was terribly wrong. Whisper of curses and dark magic filled the air, and all eyes turned to Ujunwa. The once beloved maiden, whose beauty had enchanted so many, was now seen as a harbinger of death. Ujunwa, who had once been the light of the village, was now shrouded in darkness. Each time a suitor died, a piece of her heart broke, and her once joyful spirit was crushed under the weight of grief and guilt. She wept bitterly, her tears flowing like the river that ran through the village. But there was no comfort to be found. The villagers who had once admired her now avoided her like the plague. The other maidens who had once envied her beauty now took the cruel pleasure in her misfortune, taunting her with harsh words and cold stares. Everywhere Ujunwa went, she felt the eyes of the village upon her. People would stop and stare, some with pity, others with fear. Mothers would pull their children away as she passed by, and men who once sought her favor now crossed the streets to avoid her. Even the birds seemed to have fallen silent, their songs replaced by the harsh whispers of the villagers, who spoke of curses, water spirits, and the mysterious deaths that followed Ujunwa like a dark cloud. The pain of losing not one, but 3 suitors was more than Ujunwa could bear. She became a shadow of her former self. Her once radiant smile replaced by a haunted, distant look. She stopped going to the market, stopped attending village festivals, and spent most of her days alone, hidden away in her father's compound. The lively, cheerful maiden, who had once been the heart of the village, had vanished, leaving behind a ghostly figure weighed down by sorrow and fear. And through it all, Jena watched her from afar, his heart breaking for the girl he loved more than life itself. He wanted to reach out to her, to hold her, to tell her that none of this was her fault, but something held him back, a force stronger than his love and deeper than his fear. It was the same force that had kept him silent all these years, the force that now told him that there was something more to this than mystery, something that no one in the village could understand. As Ujunwa's world grew darker, Jena knew he had to do something, even if it meant confronting the very forces that had turned his beloved friend into a pariah. One day, Ujunwa decided to make the lonely trek to the stream to fetch water for her mother. The sun was high in the sky, casting its golden rays on the earth, but the warmth in the air could not penetrate the coldness she felt in her heart. As she approached the stream, she could hear the soft rustling of leaves and the gentle trickle of water. But beneath those soothing sounds, there was something else, a faint murmur like the hissing of snakes, growing louder as she grew nearer. It was the other maidens, gathered in small clusters, their voices low and their eyes darting towards her as she approached. Ujunwa knew what they were saying. She had heard it all before. Their words, like sharp knives, cutting into her already wounded soul. Yet, she kept her head high and walked with as much dignity as she could muster. She told herself that she would fetch the water and leave without a word. But fate had other plans. Just as she reached the edge of the stream and began to lower her bucket into the water, a shadow fell across her path. Ujunwa looked up to see Ebere, one of the most outspoken and troublesome maidens in the village, standing before her with a sneer on her face. Ebere was known for her sharp tongue and her jealousy of Ujunwa's beauty. And today, that envy burned brighter than ever in her eyes. If it wasn't the witch who has been devouring all the men in this village, Ebere spat, her voice dripping with malice. The other maidens fell silent, their eyes wide as they watched the confrontation unfold. Ujunwa felt a pang in her heart, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Please, Ebere," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just want to fetch a bucket of water for my mother and leave. I don't want any trouble." But Ebere was not interested in peace. She stepped in front of Ujunwa again, blocking her path with a smug on her face. "Trouble? You've already brought enough trouble to this village with your cursed beauty. Did you not kill all your suitors? And now no man dares to come near you. Everyone knows that your beauty is not ordinary. It's evil. We don't want you in this water, spreading your curse to the rest of us." The venom in Ebere's words stung more than any physical blow could have. It was as though she had taken a blade and driven it straight into Ujunwa's heart. The other maidens began to whisper again, their voices carrying a mixture of fear and cruel satisfaction. Ujunwa could feel their eyes on her, like 1,000 tiny needles pricking at her skin. She wanted to cry, to scream, to lash out, but instead she bit her lip and forced the tears that threatened to spill over. She turned away, her shoulders heavy with the weight of her sorrow, and began the long walk back home. The bucket she carried was empty, much like the hollow feeling in her chest. As she walked, the sound of Ebere's cruel laughter echoed in her ears, mingling with the whispers of the other maidens. It was as if the entire village had turned against her, and she was powerless to stop it. When she finally reached home, she could no longer hold back the flood of emotions. She collapsed onto the ground, her body shaking with sobs that came from the depth of her soul. The once joyful and radiant maiden was now a broken shell of her former self, her spirit crushed under the weight of the taunts and the mysterious deaths that had cast a dark shadow over her life. "Why, oh gods, why?" she cried out to the heavens, her voice trembling with despair. "What have I done to deserve this? What sin have I committed to be cursed in this way?" But there was no answer, only the stillness of the air and the sound of her own heart breaking into a million pieces. Her father, a man who had once been respected and admired by all, now bore the brunt of the village scorn. The men who used to greet him with warmth and camaraderie now turned their backs on him, muttering insults and jokes behind his back. He could no longer walk through the village without feeling the sting of humiliation. His head bowed in shame as he passed by the mocking eyes of his former friends. Ujunwa's mother fared no better. In the marketplace, where she once traded goods and exchanged pleasantries with the other women, she now faced cruel jests and harsh words. The other woman would whisper as she passed, making sure she heard every spiteful word. "There goes the mother of the witch," they would say, their voices laced with bitterness. "Maybe it runs in the family." The pain of watching their daughter suffer weighed heavily on Ujunwa's parents. Night after night, they would sit in their small huts, racking their brains, trying to understand what could have brought this misfortune upon them. They searched their memories, recalling every interaction, every deed, every word they had ever spoken, trying to find a reason for the curse that had befallen their beloved daughter. But no matter how hard they tried, they could think of nothing. No enemy they had wronged, no offense they had given, no sin they had committed that could explain the dark cloud that now hung over their family. As Ujunwa lay on her mat that night, her eyes red and swollen from crying, she wondered if she would ever know peace again. The laughter, the joy, the love that once filled her life had all been stolen from her, replaced by pain, sorrow, and a deep, abiding loneliness. The stream that once brought her comfort and solace had become a place of shame and humiliation. The village that was once her home now felt like a prison where every door was closed to her and every face was turned away. And as she drifted off to sleep, her dreams were haunted by the faces of the men who had died, their eyes wide with fear, their hands reaching out to her as if begging for mercy. But no matter how hard she tried to reach them, they always slipped away, leaving her alone in the darkness, with nothing but the echo of Ebere's cruel words ringing in her ears. The incident at the stream with Ebere was the final straw for Jena. When Ujunwa tearfully recounted the humiliation she had endured, a fire of anger ignited within him. His heart pounded with fury at the thought of anyone treating Ujunwa so cruelly, especially in her vulnerable state. But as he looked into her tear-streaked face, Jena knew that his anger wouldn't help her. What Ujunwa needed was not a defender, but a friend. So with great effort, Jena swallowed his anger, allowing it to simmer beneath the surface, and focus on what mattered the most, being there for her. He sat beside her, his voice calm and soothing as he gently wiped away her tears. "Don't let Ebere's words get to you, Ujunwa," he said softly, his hand resting on hers. "She's just a jealous soul, trying to bring you down. But I'm here for you always. You're not alone in this." His words, though simple, carried a weight of sincerity that reached into Ujunwa's wounded heart. She found comfort in his presence, his unwavering support like a balm to her soul. And as he held her, promising to be with her every step of the way, a small flicker of hope began to stir within her. Jena wasn't content with just offering words of comfort. The sight of Ujunwa, now reduced to a shadow of her former self, pained him deeply. He couldn't stand by and watch her suffer without trying to find a solution. Driven by a fierce determination, Jena began to search for answers, refusing to accept that Ujunwa's fate was sealed by some cruel twist of destiny. Through his research, he learned of a powerful seer named Okute, who was said to possess the wisdom of the ages. Okute lived deep within the dense forest across the treacherous Omambala River, a place few dared to venture. The river was known for its dangerous currents and the mysterious creatures that lurked beneath its surface. But Jena was undeterred. The thought of losing Ujunwa to this cause filled him with a courage he never knew. He resolved to seek out the seer, no matter the cost, and find a way to lift the dark cloud that hung over her life. When he shared his plan with Ujunwa, she was hesitant at first. The journey was long and perilous, and the idea of crossing the Omambala River filled her with dread. But Jena's determination was contagious, and the thought of finding answers, of finally breaking free from the curse that had plagued her, gave her the strength to agree. Together, they set off on the journey, their hearts filled with both hope and trepidation. It took them 2 days to reach the Omambala River. The journey through the thick forest was exhausting, and the closer they got, the more ominous the landscape became. The air grew thick with moisture, and the cries of unseen creatures echoed through the trees. But Jena and Ujunwa pressed on, driven by the promise of a solution that lay just beyond the river. When they finally stood at the river's edge, its dark waters swirling ominously before them, Jena felt a moment of doubt. The river was as fearsome as the stories had claimed, with currents that seemed to pull and twist in unnatural ways. But he steeled himself, knowing that turning back was not an option. With great care, they boarded a small rickety boat that had been left behind, probably by travelers long gone, and began the treacherous journey across the river. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached the other side. The forest on the far side of the river was even denser, the trees towering overhead like ancient sentinels. The path was barely visible, but they pressed on, following the faint trail that led deeper into the heart of the forest. After a long search, they arrived at the clearing where Okute, the blind seer, dwelled. His small hut was surrounded by a circle of ancient trees, their branches intertwining to form a natural canopy above. As they approached, Jena felt a strange energy in the air, as if the forest itself was alive, watching their every move. Before they could even speak, Okute's voice rang out clear and strong despite his age. "I have been expecting you," he said, his unseeing eyes gazing straight ahead as if he could see into their very souls. His presence was both comforting and unsettling, a mix of wisdom and power that made them feel small in his presence. Ujunwa stepped forward, her voice trembling with both fear and hope. "Please, wise one, we have come a long way to seek your guidance. I am cursed, and I do not know why. The men who wish to marry me, they die one after the other. I don't understand why this is happening. Please tell us how to break this curse." Okute nodded slowly, as if he already knew her story. "Ujunwa," he said, his voice carrying a weight of ancient knowledge. "The answer you seek is closer than you think. Go home and ask your mother. She holds the key to your salvation. The solution of your suffering lies with her." Ujunwa stared at him, her mind racing with confusion. "My mother?" she echoed, her brow furrowed. What could she possibly have to do with this? The blind seer let out a deep, knowing laugh that echoed through the forest. "Ah! The past has a way of catching up with us, even when we least expect it. Go home, child. Your mother has the answers you seek." Still reeling from the seeker's cryptic words, Jena and Ujunwa began the journey back home, their hearts heavy with uncertainty. The forest seemed darker on their return, the shadows deeper, as if the trees themselves were holding secrets they dare not reveal. As they crossed the Umambala River once more, the weight of the seer's words hung over them like a cloud. When they finally reached the village, Ujunwa's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Could it be true? Could her mother somehow be connected to the curse that had ruined her life? She didn't know what to believe, but one thing was certain. She would confront her mother and find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The seer's words had set a fire in her heart, and she would not rest until she uncovered the secrets that had been hidden from her for so long. As soon as they returned home, Ujunwa wasted no time confronting her mother, Oledo. The journey back from the seer had been long and filled with anxious thoughts, and Ujunwa's patience had worn thin. Her heart pounded with a mix of desperation and anger as she faced her mother in the small dimly lit hut. "Mother, the seer said you know something," Ujunwa began, her voice trembling with the weight of frustration. "He said the answer to this curse lies with you." "What have you done, mother? Why is this happening to me?" Oledo's face tightened with confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about, Ujunwa," she replied, her voice steady, but her eyes flickering with unease. "I have no idea why this is happening to you. I have never done anything that could bring such a curse upon our family." Ujunwa searched her mother's eyes, hoping to find some hint of recognition, some flicker of guilt or regret. But there was nothing. Oledo's expression was resolute, her gaze unwavering. A cold wave of disappointment washed over Ujunwa. She had clung to the seer's words like a lifeline, believing that the solution to her suffering was finally within reach. But now, it seemed as though that hope had been nothing more than an illusion. "Please, mother," Ujunwa pleaded, her voice breaking. "There must be something, anything you can remember. Think. My life is falling apart, and I don't know how to stop it." But Oledo shook her head, her eyes misting over with helplessness. "I swear, Ujunwa, I don't know," she whispered, reaching out to hold her daughter's hands. "I wish I could help you, but I don't know what to do." Feeling utterly defeated, Ujunwa pulled her hand away and turned towards her bed. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her, and the tears she had held back began to spill down her cheeks. She felt trapped, as though the walls of the hut were closing in on her, suffocating her with the weight of her unsolved mystery. With a very heavy heart, she lay down on her mat, her mind spinning with thoughts of despair. As the night wore on, Ujunwa's tears finally subsided, but sleep, when it came, offered no solace. She was haunted by her usual nightmares. Dark, twisted visions of the men who had died, their faces twisted in pain, their eyes accusing. They reached for her hand, as if trying to drag her into the darkness with them. She tossed and turned, her body restless, her heart pounding with fear. But Ujunwa was not the only one haunted that night. Oledo was visited by a terrible nightmare, a frightening reminder of her past. She bolted upright in bed, her heart racing. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead as the full weight of her actions came crashing down on her. She had thought she could escape it, that the past would remain buried. But now it had returned with a vengeance, threatening to destroy everything she held dear. She rose from her bed, her legs trembling as she paced the room. Her hands shook as she covered her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had done something terrible, something that had unleashed a dark force upon her family. The realization struck her like a blow, leaving her gasping for breath. The blind seer had been right. She held the key to Ujunwa's salvation, but it was a key she had hoped would never be found. She knew she could no longer keep the truth hidden. The time had come to face her past and confess what she had done, no matter how painful it might be. Ujunwa deserved to know the truth, but it was her duty as a mother to give her the answers she so desperately sought. But as Oledo sat down on the edge of her bed, the weight of her guilt pressing down on her. She wondered if her daughter would ever be able to forgive her. Very early the next morning, as the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the walls, Oledo sat in silence, gathering her thoughts. The weight of her secrets pressed heavily on her chest, and she knew that today was the day she had to reveal the truth. There was no turning back now. She called Ujunwa and her husband to sit with her in the small dimly lit room where she often shared their most intimate family moments. The air was thick with tension as they sat down, their eyes filled with concern and curiosity. Oledo took a deep breath, steadying herself for what she was about to say. "There is something I must tell you," she began, her voice wavering with emotion. "Something I have kept hidden for many years, but I can no longer keep it to myself. The time has come for you to know the truth." Ujunwa and her father exchanged worried glances, sensing the gravity of the situation. Oledo continued, her voice soft but clear, as she took them back to a time long before Ujunwa was born. "When I was a young bride," she said, her eyes distant as she recalled the past, "I was married to your father, and we were so happy together. But as the years passed, no child came to bless our union. I became the subject of whispers and cruel gossip, a woman unable to give her husband a child. The people mocked me, and I could see the sadness in your father's eyes, though he tried his best to hide it. He loved me deeply and refused to take another wife, even when his family pressured him to do so. But I knew that every time he looked at other people's children, his heart ached for what he could not have." Oledo's voice broke as she spoke, the memories still raw and painful after all these years. Ujunwa reached out and held her mother's hand, offering silent comfort as Oledo continued. "I prayed to the gods, Ujunwa. Every day I prayed and wept, begging them to bless us with a child. But it was as if the heavens had closed their doors to me. I felt so alone, so hopeless, and when I could no longer bear the burden, I would go to the riverbank at sunset when the village women had all gone home. I would cry until I had no tears left." She paused, her eyes glazing over with the memory of those dark, lonely nights. Then, one evening, something extraordinary happened. I was sitting by the river, my heart heavy with sorrow, when I saw something that I could hardly believe. Before my very eyes, a woman emerged from the water. She was the most beautiful creature I had ever seen. Her skin glowed like the moon. Her hair was long and flowing, and her eyes sparkled with an outwardly light. She was so ethereal, so perfect, that I thought I must be dreaming. "What happened, mother?" Ujunwa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The woman approached me," Oledo continued, "but she did not leave the water. She stayed at the water's edge, smiling at me with a kindness that made my heart ache. 'What troubles you, Oledo?' she asked me. 'Why do you cry so much?' Her voice was soft and soothing like a gentle breeze. I was stunned that she knew my name, but she just laughed at my surprise. 'You are surprised I know who you are?' she said. What if I told you that I know what troubles you? I see you sit here and cry every day. I feel your pain, and I am here to help you. Oledo's voice trembled as she recounted the fateful encounter. I was desperate, Ujunwa. The hope in my heart fled to life again when she said those words. I told her everything, how I longed for a child, how my husband's sorrow was tearing me apart. The woman from the water listened with compassion, and then she made me an offer. She promised to grant my heart's desires, to give me the child I so desperately wanted. But there was a price. She said, "You must offer me a living sacrifice every new year until you die." Ujunwa gasped, her eyes widening with shock. "A living sacrifice?" "Yes," Oledo replied, her voice thick with regret. At the time, the deal did not seem so difficult. I was willing to do anything to have a child, to bring back joy into our lives. So I agreed. I made the promise, and just as she said, I became pregnant soon after. Everyone was astonished. After years of waiting, I gave birth to you, Ujunwa. You were the answer to all my prayers, my beautiful, perfect daughter. A tear slipped down Oledo's cheek as she looked at Ujunwa, the love in her eyes mingling with the pain of what she had done. For years, I kept my promise to the river goddess. Every new year, I offered a living sacrifice, a goat, just as she had asked. And everything was fine. But then something happened that changed everything. Oledo's voice grew quieter as she recalled the dark days that followed. Our village was attacked by a neighboring tribe, a powerful enemy that we had no hope of defeating. They burned our homes, killed our people, and took others as slaves. Your father and I lived close to the outskirts of the village, so when we heard the warning cries, we knew we had to flee. We were lucky. We took you and ran, leaving everything behind. We fled to a distant village, far away from the horrors we had witnessed, and there we began our lives. We had nothing but each other, but we were safe. Oledo's shoulders slumped as she spoke, the weight of her memories pressing down on her. In the chaos of our escape, I was unable to keep my promise to the river goddess. I missed the New Year's sacrifice. But when nothing happened, when no curse befell us, I began to hope that maybe, just maybe, the goddess had forgotten. The next year came and went again. Nothing happened. After a few years, I allowed myself to believe that the pact had been broken, that we were free from the curse. I lived here in this village in peace, raising you and your siblings, and I let go of my fears. Oledo closed her eyes, her voice barely more than a whisper. I had all forgotten about everything, but I was wrong, Ujunwa. I was so very wrong. The curse never left us. It was simply waiting, biding its time. And now, after all these years, it has returned to claim its due. Silence filled the room as Oledo finished her story, the weight of her confession hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. Ujunwa and her father sat in stunned silence, the enormity of what they had just heard slowly sinking in. "Mother," Ujunwa finally said, her voice trembling with emotion. What do we do now? How can we break this curse? Oledo shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't know, my child. I don't know if there is a way to undo what I have done. Her husband Okoli and Ujunwa were stunned by Oledo's revelation. Okoli had never imagined that his beloved wife had made such a grave sacrifice to give them a gift of a child. The shock of it left him speechless, but not once did he blame her. Ujunwa too felt no anger towards her mother, only a deep sorrow and concern for what lay ahead. That day, the house was cloaked in silence. Each of them was lost in thoughts, contemplating the weight of the situation and the uncertain paths before them. When Jena came by, as he always did, to check on Ujunwa, she shared with him her mother's confession. His eyes widened with disbelief as he listened to the story. But ever the optimist, he tried to lift the heavy mood. With a mischievous glint in his eyes, he teased. So it turns out you are really from the water, just like everyone says, huh? Ujunwa managed a small life, despite the gravity of the situation. Unfortunately, it seems so, she replied, though her smile quickly faded. The reality of their predicament pressed down on her, and her voice grew serious once more. But what do we do now, Jena? Jidena's expression grew thoughtful as he considered their options. Well, it seems clear, he said slowly. Your mother has to take the sacrifice to the river as she once did. Maybe there's still a way to make things right. Ujunwa's heart ached as she relayed this idea to her mother. Oledo, however, was terrified. It's been over 17 years, Uju, she whispered, her voice trembling. I saw the river goddess last night in my dreams. She was furious. I have never seen her like that before. But mother, Ujunwa pleaded, her eyes filling with tears. We have to do something. We don't know what she will do next if we just wait. Realizing that Ujunwa was right, that they had no choice, and with Okoli's presence by her side, Oledo gathered her courage. Together, they made the difficult journey back to the village they had fled so many years ago. The memories of that place, of the life they had once lived there, came rushing back as they approached the familiar riverbank. But the reunion with the river goddess did not go as they had hoped. When Oledo offered the sacrifice, the goddess appeared before them, her beauty now overshadowed by a terrifying rage. She rejected the offering with a wave of her hand, her voice echoing through the air like a thunderclap. You have broken your promise, Oledo, she declared, her eyes blazing with fury. You must now choose. Either offer me the life of your daughter, Ujunwa, or your own in her place. If you do neither, I will erase your entire family from existence as if you never walked this earth. The goddess's words struck them like a physical blow, and as she disappeared back into the depths of the river, Oledo collapsed to the ground, overcome with grief. She wept bitterly, the reality of the impossible choice before her crushing her spirits. Okoli too was in despair, unable to find the words to comfort his wife. His heart was heavy with sorrow, knowing the weight of the decision that now hung over them all. As they made their way back home, the journey felt even longer and more daunting than before. The future that awaited them was uncertain, and the burden of the curse weighed heavily on their souls. Oledo, haunted by the knowledge of the covenant she had made all those years ago, knew that the consequences of her actions had finally caught up with her. Now she would have to face them head on, even if it meant paying the ultimate price. The silence between Oledo and Okoli as they returned home was filled with unspoken fears and the pain of a family torn apart by forces beyond their control. Jena and Ujunwa waited anxiously for her parents to return, while her younger siblings, unaware of the storm brewing in their lives, had already gone to bed. When Okoli and Oledo finally arrived, the weight of their journey was written on their faces. Oledo pulled Ujunwa and Jena aside, her voice trembling as she recounted what had happened at the river. The gravity of the situation hung in the air like a dark cloud. Before saying anything, Oledo made them swear to keep everything a secret for the sake of their family. The seriousness of her tone left no room for argument. Tears welled up in Ujunwa's eyes as the reality of their predicament sank in. She did not want to die, and she couldn't bear the thought of her mother dying either. But someone had to pay the price to save the family. With a trembling voice, she whispered, "I'll go, mother. Let it be me." But Oledo shook her head firmly, her eyes filled with a mother's love and sorrow. "No, my child. A mother's duty is to protect her children, even if it means giving up her own life. This is my burden to bear, not yours." Her words were final, leaving no room for Ujunwa to protest. Without another word, Oledo retreated to her room and closed the door behind her, the sound echoing like the closing of a chapter. That night, no one slept. Okoli sat in the same spot, staring into the darkness, his eyes red from unshed tears. Jena did not go home. He stayed by Ujunwa's side, offering silent support as they both grappled with the heartbreak that was to come. The house was filled with a heavy silence, broken only by occasional sob. They all dreaded the arrival of the morning, knowing it would bring an unbearable reality. When dawn finally broke, a chilling silence fell over the house. Oledo did not wake up from her sleep. They found her lying peacefully in bed, as if she were simply resting, but her body was cold as ice. Ujunwa's heart shattered as she realized that her mother had made the ultimate sacrifice. The grief that followed was overwhelming as the family was plunged into mourning. The villagers gathered outside, whispering and speculating about what had happened, but none knew the true story. That same night, under the cover of darkness, Okoli took Oledo's body to the river, fulfilling the goddess's demand. He laid her gently on the water, and as the current carried her away, they stood silently, watching her disappear into the depths. The weight of their loss was too much to bear, yet they knew they had no choice but to keep the truth hidden. To avoid the prying eyes and gossip of the villagers, Okoli did something drastic. He buried an empty box behind their house, allowing the others to believe that it held his wife's remains. The villagers, seeing the freshly dug grave, assumed that Oledo had been laid to rest there. Ujunwa had not stepped out of her house since her mother's death, and this troubled Jena deeply. Day by day, he watched as her once bright spirit dimmed, and he knew he couldn't stand by any longer. Determined to bring back her smile to her face, Jena decided that no matter what, he would get Ujunwa to leave the confines of her home. After much persuasion, he finally convinced her to join him in the village square to watch the young boys wrestle, a tradition that had always brought joy to their hearts. As they made their way to the square, they unexpectedly crossed paths with Ebere and her usual group of friends who were on their way to fetch water. Ebere, never one to miss an opportunity to stir trouble, clapped her hands mockingly as she saw them. "Here, everybody take cover, the witch is passing," she sneered, her voice dripping with malice. If she could kill her own mother, who knows who will be next? Ujunwa, her heart heavy with grief and anger, stepped forward ready to confront Ebere. But before she could speak, Jena gently held her back and stepped forward himself, facing Ebere with a calm yet firm gaze. He said, "You need help, Ebere. You've spent so much energy hating on Ujunwa, who has done nothing to you. If you'd taken half of that time to work on your own dirty character, maybe you'd have found a good man to manage you by now. But no, you're filled with nothing but hate, envy and bitterness. Leave Ujunwa alone and focus on fixing yourself." Jidena's words cut through Ebere like a knife. Her face flushed with anger and her eyes burned with fury. "Keep following her like a dog, Jena. If you like, go ahead and marry her. You'll just end up dead like the rest of them," she spat out, hissing in frustration. But Jena only laughed, his voice light and confident. "I just hope you stick around to see the day I marry her," he retorted, taking Ujunwa's hand and leading her away, leaving Ebere seething with rage. That evening, Jena and Ujunwa sat together in front of her father's compound. The air was thick with unspoken feelings that had been building between them for years. Finally, Jena turned to her, his eyes reflecting the sincerity of his words. "Ujunwa, I meant what I said to Ebere today. I want to marry you," he confessed, his voice steady and filled with emotion. Ujunwa stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't expected this, and for a moment, she wondered if he was saying it out of pity. "No, Jide. I know you are only saying this because you feel sorry for me. After all that's happened, you don't have to marry me out of obligation," she replied, her voice wavering. Jena shook his head firmly. "Far from it, Uju. I've loved you for a very long time, even before we were teenagers. But I was too scared to tell you how I truly felt. It broke my heart every time a man came to marry you, and I couldn't do anything about it. I nearly lost you, Ujunwa, and I won't make that mistake again. Please, say you will marry me," he pleaded, his eyes filled with hope. Ujunwa could hardly believe what she was hearing. If there was anyone she wanted to spend the rest of her life with, it was Jena. He had stood by her through thick and thin, through every trial and tribulation, and he loved her still, despite everything. Her eyes shone with tears of joy as she looked at him and nodded her head. "Yes, Jena. Yes, I'll marry you," she whispered. Overwhelmed with happiness, Jena pulled her into a tight embrace, and together they cried, tears of relief, of love, and victory over the many challenges they had faced. After all they had been through, they had finally found their way to each other, and in that moment they knew that their love would carry them through whatever life had in store. The news of Ujunwa and Jena's engagement spread like wildfire through the village. It became the talk of every gathering, with villagers divided in their opinions. Some shook their heads in disbelief, fearing for Jena's life and whispering that Ujunwa had bewitched him. They claimed it was only a matter of time before he met the same fate as her previous suitors. Others, however, shrugged off these fears, believing that Jena knew exactly what he was doing. They admired his courage and loyalty, and some even envied the bond they shared with Ujunwa. Ebere, on the other hand, was consumed by bitterness. She couldn't understand how, after everything, Ujunwa still managed to find happiness. Each day, she waited for the news that Jena had met an untimely death, convinced that the curse would eventually claim him too. But day after day, nothing happened. As the date of the wedding approached, Ebere's heart grew heavier with malice, her thoughts poisoned by envy. The day of the wedding finally arrived. The entire village turned out for the celebration, eager to see if the event would unfold without disaster. To everyone's amazement, the ceremony went off without a hitch. Ujunwa and Jena were married under the sun, with the villagers gathered around watching as the ceremony took place. The air was filled with laughter and songs, and even the staunchest skeptics began to soften. Whispers circulated among the crowd. Perhaps Ujunwa wasn't cursed after all. Perhaps the tragedies of the past were just tragic coincidences. As the day wore on, joy filled the hearts of the most, and they danced and feasted to their content. But not everyone shared in the happiness. Ebere stood at a distance, her face twisted with jealousy. She had waited, expected disaster, yet nothing had happened. It infuriated her to see Ujunwa smiling, surrounded by love, while she remained alone, with not even a single suitor to her name. But no one paid her any mind. They did not even take note of her brooding presence. A year later, Ujunwa and Jena's joy multiplied with the birth of their first child, a beautiful baby girl. They named her Oledo, after Ujunwa's mother, as a tribute to the woman who had sacrificed everything for their happiness. The villagers, who had once feared and gossiped about Ujunwa, now looked at her family with admiration. Ujunwa and Jena went on to have more children, their home filled with love and laughter. Ebere's bitterness slowly faded into insignificance as life moved on, and the villagers no longer remembered her spite. Ujunwa and Jena lived out their days together. In the end, they found the happiness they had fought so hard to achieve, living peacefully ever after. Hey lovers, thank you for listening to my story. And if you're new here, welcome to my space. I hope you enjoyed listening to my story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you have not done so already, please hit the subscribe button. And to support the growth of our community, give this video a big thumbs up and drop a comment. I'll take my leave now, but I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.